Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another card video at my YouTube channel and blog. Today I'm going to be using this stamp set from Mama Elephant called Brushed Florals to create another card that uses Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. Because I'm going to be using my Zig markers, I'm going to be coloring onto some Bristol Smooth paper. Like I mentioned in my video on Monday, this Bristol Smooth paper is a dream for use with these markers in particular. Using a border stamp set from Mama Elephant before I get to the actual usage of the markers, I'm taking that border stamp and I've straightened it out by butting it up against a ruler and then picking that up with my compact stamp press. I'm using some VersaFine Black Onyx ink to stamp this border onto the side of my Bristol Smooth paper. So I'm going to stamp this stamp twice, so I'll ink it up once more and then stamp it directly to the left of the original border that I stamped. Now I'm going to be doing I'm going to have those floral stamps right up against those lines that I've stamped, and I want to make sure that they don't go over the lines, so I'm going to add a little bit of masking. Thought about using some post-it tape for this, but then I decided I'd just use masking tape because that seems to work really well. So I did put that masking tape onto my arm just so it would take away a little bit of that tackiness because I don't want there to be any chance of that tape tearing my project. So now I'm going to pick up that stamp set, but pause. We have to back up in time here for a minute, and I'm going to show you what I had to do to get these stamps prepped to use with my Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. So I noticed that as I tried to use them with the markers, that marker ink would just bead up on the top of this stamp surface, and it wouldn't give me a nice impression when I went to stamp these images. So I remembered a tip that I learned from Tim Holtz, and he talks about it a lot in Creative Chemistry 101, which is his class over at onlinecardclasses.com. He mentions that you can prime or prep your stamps by applying archival jet black ink to your stamps and then letting it dry on the surface. So that's what I did. I just let that archival ink dry for just a couple minutes, not very long, and then I wiped them off with a baby wipe. And even though he says to let it dry overnight, I discovered that just doing it just this much was enough to make them usable with these markers. So I just had to make sure that each stamp image was completely cleaned off before I went on to use it. And I did want to mention that it does stain the stamp a little bit, makes them a little bit gray, but it doesn't transfer to your project. In fact, it just makes you get clean, crisp images when you stamp. So I can't wait to try this technique with the archival ink on some other stamp sets that have given me trouble in the past. So here I am just kind of testing my whole theory out that I could use those now primed stamps to create some floral images. So we're going to return back to our project here, and I'm going to resume all of my stamping. So the first thing I did was I stamped my greeting. I just have this saying, "You're amazing." And I'm using some VersaFine Black Onyx ink, or I'm sorry, VersaFine Onyx Black ink to do all of this stamping. So now I'm going to move on to the watercolor stamping with these markers. For each stamp image, the first time I used it, I made sure to clean that image off one more time because I noticed that I had missed some spots of wiping off that extra archival ink. And I wanted to make sure that no black ink was mixed into that marker color. So there's the stamp I'm going to be using. I'm going to use this color called Light Carmine, and you'll be able to see when I place it over that white that it coats that stamp beautifully. It doesn't beat up at all, and when I actually go to stamp the image, I'll be able to get all of those detailed lines that are on the stamp. This is a great thing for when you're doing these watercolor images because it gives you a better idea of the image shape that you're coloring. Now I did want to mention that even though I did prep these stamps so I could get all of those brush stroke details that are in the stamp image, I am going to be adding water to these, so it's going to soften them out quite a bit. So I guess in a way you could argue that I didn't need to prime the stamps at all because I would be kind of washing away some of that detail with a water brush. However, just knowing that that detail was there before I brought water to it, eased my mind a bit on making sure that these images didn't end up looking just like big blobs, if that makes sense. So I'm adding some green onto that leaf stamp, and I'm going to add a dark green over the top. It's going to give it a little bit of some color shifting on top. And then I can move on to the rest of the stamping. You'll notice that I have sped up the video process. This is just because I didn't want you guys sitting here for 30 minutes while I stamp a lot of florals, but I did want to show you the process. So that larger flower stamp was the first one that I tried, and it did lose a little bit of that distinguishing detail that it needed. So I took my brush tip marker, I think the color was wine red, and just flicked on some little center areas for the flower, and that seemed to give it a little bit more definition. So now I'm just filling out the other areas of the image here, and at this point I realized I would need to stamp over the top of those words. And at first I was concerned, but then I kind of schemed a plan in my mind for what I would do in the event that it wasn't very legible after I was done coloring all of the flower images. And I will show you exactly what I did for those words in a minute here. So I finished stamping all of the flowers and leaves. Wanted to make sure I had a good design filling out that entire corner area of my Bristol smooth paper. And then I decided to add some more black in here. I didn't like how the words and the border stamps were the only bits of black. So I used my black Zig Clean Color Real Brush marker and drew that onto an acrylic block. Added a little bit of water with my water brush, and then ran the brush off the edge of the block to flick on a little bit of that black ink. I think it looks really great. It's a more artistic look, and these stamps that I've used create kind of a brush look anyway, so it kind of lends to that whole aesthetic. I'm going to use some white gouache now. White gouache is almost like an acrylic paint, except it works a little bit better with water, I think. And so I just diluted that down just a tiny bit to make it more smooth. And then I added some white around these words. This is going to give them a little bit more definition, and you'll be able to read the words more clearly. You definitely don't have to do this step, but I found that it really did make the words look and read a little bit better. So I'm adding the white to the right side of each letter. So if we think about if it had a shadow, that white would be the shadow. So I'm just wanting to add that in to make it so that the words are more easily defined. So in our mind, when we go to read this, it stands out and we know that it says, "You're amazing." I'm going to peel up that border. You can see some of that black ink transferred onto the tape, but not a huge problem. And I'll take off the rest of the blue tape as well. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this piece down so that it's the right size for my card front. And I'm also going to use some glitter paper. This is the same glitter paper that I used last week from American Crafts. I'm using that scrap that's left over from that card from last week, in fact, and I cut it to a little strip. My card base is created out of some 110-pound Neenah Solar White cardstock, and I've scored that at 5.5 to create a top folding card. Added some Tombow Extreme adhesive on the back of my black glitter paper strip, and then I adhered that to the rightmost edge on the front of the card. You'll notice that there's a little bit of white peeking out at the very top of that black strip. That's because I didn't have perfect placement when I adhered it. However, that Tombow Extreme adhesive is very, very strong, and I wasn't able to peel it up and fix it. So instead, in order to hide that white edge, I'm taking a tuxedo black marker from Memento, and I'm going to paint the very edge of this card. This is going to kind of disguise any of that white cardstock that was peeking out from the glitter cardstock or the glitter paper that I've applied. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this. And I found the easiest way to do that was to press the card down over the top of some white paper and then just draw right along that edge. And that made it so I didn't have any additional black drawn on the inside of the card. I've added foam adhesive to my watercolor panel, and I'm going to prop that up on its end, and that gives me the perfect position for the bottom of the card front. And that finishes the card for today. Hope you guys enjoyed. This is a really fun kind of stamping technique that was like I said, it was fun to figure out. That priming of your stamps with archival jet black ink is a tip that I'm going to use in the future when I don't get nice, clean stamped images from some of my stamp sets. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I'll be back on Friday with the third Zig Clean Color Real Brush Marker video in this mini series. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys then.